Is it possible to be prepared for the worst day of your life? Not with supplies or a plan, but with knowledge, with an understanding of the world so deep that when the modern world falls apart, the ancient one catches you. This is a story about a fall from the sky, an impossible ordeal, and a young woman who found her salvation not by fighting the wild, but by listening to it. This is the story of how, for one survivor, the jungle wasn't a prison. It became her guide. It was Christmas Eve, 1971, for 17-year-old Julianne Koepke. The day was filled with excitement and anticipation. She had just graduated from high school in Lima, Peru, and was about to fly to the jungle outpost of Pucallpa to meet her father, the renowned zoologist Hans Wilhelm Koepke. Her mother, Maria, also a famous biologist, was with her. For Julianne, the Amazon rainforest wasn't some distant, terrifying place. It was her childhood home. She had grown up at a research station her parents ran, a life filled with the sounds of monkeys and the study of exotic birds. She understood the jungle's rhythms, its dangers, and its secrets in a way few others could. They boarded Lanza Flight 508, a Lockheed L-188 Electra turboprop plane. It was a routine, 50-minute flight. The cabin was filled with the quiet hum of holiday travelers, families eager to be reunited for Christmas. About 25 minutes into the flight, the sky began to change. Dark, ominous clouds gathered, the kind that held the raw, violent power of the Amazon. The plane began to shake. At first, it was just turbulence, but it quickly escalated into something terrifying. Passengers began to cry, their luggage falling from the overhead bins. Outside the window, a storm of biblical proportions was raging. Julianne's mother, Maria, said calmly, "I don't like this." It would be the last thing she ever heard her say. A blinding flash of lightning struck the plane. The roar of the engines was replaced by a deafening, tearing sound of metal. The plane didn't just fail, it disintegrated around them. Julianne felt the floor drop away, and suddenly she was outside, still strapped to her bench of 3 seats, tumbling through the open air. The wind screamed in her ears as she was thrown about. The city of Lima, the plane, the other passengers, everything was gone. There was only the violent sky and the endless green canopy of the jungle spinning wildly below her. Then she lost consciousness. She fell for 10,000 feet, 2 miles. An impossible, unsurvivable distance. The row of seats, however, acted like a sycamore seed or a helicopter blade, auto-rotating and slowing the descent just enough. The final impact was cushioned by the thick, interwoven canopy of the Amazon rainforest. When Julianne awoke, it was the next day, Christmas morning. The first thing she felt was not pain, but the eerie, unnatural silence. The chaos of the crash was gone, replaced by the gentle dripping of rain from the leaves. She was lying on the jungle floor, still strapped to her seat. She had a severe concussion, a broken collarbone, deep cuts on her legs, and her right eye was swollen completely shut. She was alone, a 17-year-old girl, injured, with no supplies, in the heart of the world's most dangerous jungle. Her first instinct was to find her mother. She called out, "Mama, Mama!" But the only reply was the echo of her own voice through the dense trees. For the rest of that day, she searched the crash site, a grim and heartbreaking task. She found pieces of the plane, Christmas presents scattered on the jungle floor, and, devastatingly, other passengers. None had survived the fall. The realization that she was the sole survivor began to sink in, a weight almost as heavy as the grief for her mother. By the second day, a sense of profound shock gave way to a singular focus: survival. And it was here that her unique upbringing became her lifeline. Standing amidst the wreckage, injured and alone, the voice of her father echoed in her mind. It was a lesson he had taught her years ago, a core principle of jungle survival. "Julianne," he had said, "if you are ever lost in the jungle, find water. Find a stream and follow it downstream. A small stream will lead to a larger one, and a larger river will always lead to civilization." This piece of advice became her compass, her mission. She found a small spring bubbling from the ground near the crash site. This was it. This was her path. Her journey had begun. The jungle that should have killed her was now her only hope. But it would not make it easy. The terrain was a nightmare. She waded through waist-deep water, her only footwear a single sandal. She couldn't see the bottom and feared the stingrays known to hide in the mud. At night, she saw snakes. But her knowledge cast out fear. Her parents had taught her that most snakes in the Amazon weren't venomous, and they would likely flee from her. She saw crocodiles and caimans, but knew they were unlikely to attack a person in the water. The real enemies were smaller and far more persistent. Mosquitoes and flies swarmed her relentlessly. The bites swelled up, becoming infected in the constant oppressive humidity, and then came something worse. She had a deep, open gash on her upper arm. Flies had laid their eggs in the wound, and the eggs had hatched. By the 4th day of her journey, the wound was infested with writhing maggots, which were eating their way into her flesh. The pain was sickening, constant, and she could do nothing but endure it. She had no food except for a small bag of candy she found at the crash site. When that was gone, she was faced with starvation. She saw frogs and fruits, but her father had also taught her what not to do. Never eat anything you don't recognize. A brightly colored frog could be poisonous. A strange fruit could be deadly. So she ate nothing. Her hunger was a constant, gnawing ache. Day after day, she followed the water. The stream grew larger, becoming a small river. She often walked along the banks, but sometimes had to swim when the jungle became too dense. The journey was a monotonous cycle of pain, hunger, and resolve. The sun rarely pierced the thick canopy, leaving her in a perpetual green twilight. There were moments of utter despair where she would collapse, certain she could not take another step. In those moments, she would think of her father, waiting for her, and the lessons he had taught her. She wasn't just a lost girl. She was the daughter of 2 brilliant scientists. The jungle wasn't an enemy. It was a complex system, and she understood its rules. On the 10th day, the maggots in her arm had burrowed so deep that she could no longer feel her arm. She was exhausted, starving, and on the verge of giving up. And then she saw it, a small, man-made canoe moored on the riverbank. It was the first sign of human life in 10 days. Hope, fierce and overwhelming, surged through her. She knew she was close. A few hours later, she found a small, empty hut used by local loggers. She was too weak to continue. She crawled up the riverbank and into the shelter. Inside, she found a motor and a barrel of gasoline. And again, a memory of her father's teachings surfaced. She remembered him using gasoline to treat a similar parasitic infection in their dog. It was a risky, painful idea, but she was desperate. She siphoned a small amount of gasoline and poured it into her maggot-infested wound. The pain was excruciating, a searing fire that made her scream, but it worked. She managed to pull out over 30 maggots from her arm. She spent that night in the hut, drifting in and out of consciousness. The next day, she heard voices. 3 local lumberjacks were returning to their camp. When they saw her, a pale, one-eyed girl covered in mud and bites, they were terrified. They thought she was a Yamanya, a mythical water spirit from local folklore. Julianne, who spoke fluent Spanish, explained what had happened. The men's fear turned to awe and compassion. They treated her wounds with local remedies, gave her food, and took her by canoe on a 7-hour journey to the nearest village. From there, she was airlifted to a hospital in Pucallpa, and there her father was waiting. Julianne Koepke was the sole survivor of Leyensa Flight 508. Her story of falling 10,000 feet was already a miracle. But her 11-day journey through the Amazon, guided by the wisdom of her parents, is what makes her ordeal one of the most incredible survival stories of all time. She didn't survive by luck alone. She survived because the jungle, which for anyone else would have been a death sentence, was in her blood. She dedicated her life to its study, becoming a renowned biologist, a guardian of the very place that nearly claimed her life, but in the end guided her home.